Hello, morphing beings. Welcome to yet again another video. Let's look at an observation we can make. On the streets, look around you. How do people carry themselves? What polarities can be seen when you look at these people? What are the differences that can be seen? Let's take one parameter. Let's take speed, for example. People can walk really fast, or really slow, in between. Maybe they're not even moving at all. Could also be the case. This is polarity that can be seen. Let's look at weight, for example, not necessarily physically, but how they carry themselves. How much do they weigh themselves down, or are they really light? Maybe they're really light on their feet. They move as if they're some sort of angel. Some people move as if they're being crushed down with a heavy boulder. This is also a polarity that can be seen. Let's look at something else. Let's look, for example, the positioning of the feet. Are they straight? Are they internally rotated? Externally rotated? This gives information, like I said. Observation gives information. So, what is yet another polarity that can be noticed when looking at people that I find very interesting? How is their posture? And with posture I mean really, like I said, how do they carry themselves when they walk? Their posture tells me a lot. Some people, they walk around, walk really lightly, really fast, engaging with their environment, and then you look at someone else and they're like this, maybe even looking only at their feet, not even looking around them. This is interesting. Tells a lot about how someone functions, how someone behaves, how someone carry themselves. So let's look at this posture. We call this a flexion, and this posture extension. So what does it mean, flexion and extension? What it really means, like how it's mostly used, it's in biomechanical terms. It just means bending one way or the other. So in this case, flexion would mean bending forward, and extension would mean bending backward. Like I said, this way or this way. Why is this the case? Why is one bending a flexion and the other an extending motion? Well, biomechanically you could say the one is going with gravity, like the way of ease, and the other is moving against gravity, kind of the counter strain of this way of ease. So how is this being created? Let's look a little bit at embryology. Let's look at embryology a little bit. How does a baby grow in the womb of a woman? Well, mainly the driver is the flow of fluids. This flow of fluids, first there are no arteries. You can imagine when it first starts, only one single cell with polarity that's getting more complex. A lot of motion of these fluids inside because there are no real structures there. Then at a moment, just like a riverbed is created by the flow of water going down a mountain, arteries are created to direct this flow, which is constantly in motion. Well, arteries are structures, physical structures, and arteries can direct the flow, which is good. It gives order in the space, but it's also a limiting factor for growth. This artery will eventually let the growth slow down, and this growth will result in a bending of the embryo. This is what we call flexion, because it's the way of the ease. The bending goes over the artery or blood vessel, because really it's not even an artery yet. So we can say flexion is the way of ease, and extension is the counter strain countering this way of ease. So let's look at this flexion and extension a little bit more. We can say flexion is moving internal, the way of ease, going internally in ourselves. This, in my eyes, is not only necessarily a physical behavior. It is coupled, like always, with a mental and emotional side as well. Let's make another observation about moving internally. When do we move internally? Not only physically, but also mentally or maybe emotionally. Let's take sleep, for example. When we sleep, okay, we can lie on our back, that's for sure, but what's a very comfortable position? You kind of bend, maybe you lie on your side, you bend your back a little bit, bending together, maybe going into a fetal position. This fetal position is also very characteristic for flexion or moving internally. Let's, for example, thinking. When we're thinking, deep in thought, what are we usually, in what kind of position are we usually? And I will give you a hint. If you look up, or maybe even know, the Karditsa thinker, how is this guy's position? Like this, right? Maybe even like this. I don't know for sure if it's the chin or the head. But it is in flexion. It's moving internally. We are moving into ourselves. Maybe even studying. Well, we are engaging with the environment, but still it's very internally processed. So what are we doing? We go into flexion. We write down. We see this. Let's look at the emotional side. For example, when we're crying. When we are crying, what is our natural urge? We go internal. We go like this. Removing ourselves from the outside and going internal. These are all qualities of flexion. Let's look at the other side of the coin. Let's look at extension. We could say if flexion is moving internally, then extension is moving externally. Like not only physical, but also mental and emotional. We can say moving externally is engaging with the environment, or maybe even better, moving externally is necessary to engage with the environment. You can't really engage with the environment when you're bended like this and you're only able to, you're not really connected to your environment. If you want to be connected to your environment, you have to engage, you have to extend yourself. We can see this in children playing. They're really extended, they're playing around. Dynamic sports, for example, also really like tennis. You can already know my opinion about fitness is a little bit conflicted in this manner, because we can still be very internally, very much in flexion, and still have the feeling we are doing extending work, but still it's also a form of extension. It's really relative also, by the way, all these polarities in the gray area. But a big emotion for me, which has been coupled to extension for me, is anger. It's also the other side of the coin. When we're crying or we're sad, we're moving internally. And what do we do when we're angry? When we're angry, we move externally. We focus outside. We feel injustice and we want to change this. To change this, we have to engage with our environment, to extend, to move external. So with all these observations, it's really interesting to think about this. Maybe when you look around you the coming few days or hour, I don't know, whenever you're on the streets or see someone moving past you, it's interesting to look at them. how is their flexion and extension in their behavior? Because really it's just as every other polarity, it's different side of the same coin, which is already maybe not a bit too dualistic, because really when I say there's two sides on the same coin, it's already indicating that it's one or the other, but really it's the spectrum where people are working inwards, or in the middle of the spectrum, really the gray area. It's not only one time that they go into flexion and the other time they go into extension. This is the case in reality. People don't only go in flexion or only go in extension, and it's really also on their environment, what their environment demands of them and how they engage with it. So it's interesting to see this very relatively. Maybe someone in sports will be really, really in extension, but then when they don't play sports, they're really in flexion. We can see this also in actors, some actors, not all, as far as I know, some actors will, when they're acting, they will act very extended, but then when their acting is done, they really into flexion, like, how did I do? Really insecure. Like I said, not everyone, it's just an observation which gives information. So my message would be, when you walk on the streets or even see me, what am I doing right now? This is an interesting relativity. I've just went swimming, I cycled a lot, I'm pretty tired right now, so I am in a sort of state of flexion. I'm resting on my knees, my elbows on my knees, but still need to engage with the environment, which is you guys. So I'm extending my neck, the rest of my body is kind of in a flexed position. So this is interesting in the relativity concept. Some areas can be in flexion, some in extension. It's not only the whole of the being extended or flexed. So when you look at people coming days, try to see them in these classes of flexion and extension, because it can give some interesting information about how people function and how they engage with their environment. So, short one this week. I will say goodbye here. Remember that we are morphing beings. We either morph or we die. So let's morph well, and let's morph a bit more consciously. It's also a tip for me, for myself. Nice. Well, if you enjoyed this, leave a like. If you found it really helpful, you could maybe share it with someone. If you have anything you would like to add or say to me, you can leave it in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.